Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this Glaucoma UK webinar on pigment dispersion glaucoma. I think we'll get started. I think that's people coming through the door now. My name is Philippa Mason, and I am the Glaucoma UK Development Manager for Scotland. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Miss Siene Ng. Siene is a consultant ophthalmic surgeon specialising in glaucoma and with expertise in cataracts and minimally invasive glaucoma device implantation, or MIGS as we know them for short. Siene works at Cardiff at the University Hospital of Wales. Siene is a wonderful friend to Glaucoma UK and has done a few of these webinars for us, and we're always really grateful for her to give up her time to do this. So thank you so much, Siene, for doing that. She always gets rave reviews after her webinars, particularly because she helps us take some of those really complicated areas of glaucoma and make them lovely and easy to understand, which is much appreciated. Right, let me just share my screen so I know what I'm doing here. Excellent. Today, the reason we've kind of come to this webinar is we did one about 3 years ago, all about pseudo-exfoliation glaucoma. And it was a really big hit, not just initially when we showed it, but afterwards. We had a lot of hits afterwards from people who had pseudo, who then looked at the glaucoma webinar afterwards to learn a little bit more about it. But we also had people talking to us saying, I've got pigment dispersion glaucoma. Can you do something about that? So that's why we've kind of asked Siene to do this, and she's very kindly taken up the challenge to help us understand a little bit more about it. Now, I'm so glad so many of you have chosen to spend your morning with us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here. The format for today is pretty much how we normally do it. It will involve me doing this little bit of chatter, then handing over to Siene for the presentation. And then afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A session. Now, please post any questions you have for Siene in the Q&A box. Now, if you don't have any questions or you can't think of how to phrase it, but you think to yourself, do you know what, that question there, I like that, you can just tick or just kind of highlight the little thumbs up, and that will tell us that more than one person is interested to know the answer to that. So please do that. If you're watching on Facebook today, hello to all our Facebook viewers. You can also ask questions by writing your question into the Facebook feed, and they'll be fed into me. A question and answer session is going to be at the end of the presentation. Really happy to have you here today. Please do ask questions. There's no such thing as silly questions, but just to let you know, this webinar will concentrate on the questions about pigment dispersion glaucoma. If we have time for anything at the end, I might be able to put a few extras in, but let's try to keep it focused to the subject. I'm now going to just launch a short poll with you. I'm sure you guys who've done this before know what this is all about, but this helps us understand whether you're learning from our webinars. So I've just launched that now. The question is, how much do you know about pigment dispersion glaucoma? And the options are nothing, a little, a fair amount, a lot. So that's brilliant. I can see you all writing about that now or answering that question now. And I'm going to ask you the same at the end. And that gives us a good idea of how we're doing. Right, I think that's everybody there. I'm going to end that poll now. Thank you so much, everybody. And without further ado, and enough of me yapping on, I think I'm going to hand over to Siene now. Siene, thank you so much. Lovely to have you here today. Are you happy to start sharing your slides, and I'll get out of the way and let you get on with it?
Yep, as soon as I get control of it. Thank you very much, Philippa. I will proceed to share my screen now. Hopefully it shares.
Yep, I'll tell you when it comes on, Siene.
Share.
That's great, that's on.
Is that on? Lovely.
It's on,
great.
Perfect.
Fantastic. So thank you, Philippa, for that lovely introduction. As she's mentioned, my name is Siene, just like the Bible tells you not to. I work in Cardiff Eye Unit, and I specialize in glaucoma and cataracts and MIGS, as she was mentioning. Thank you, Glaucoma UK, for inviting me to speak about pigment dispersion syndrome and glaucoma, a topic that is not covered very well often, especially based towards patients. So this talk is more for the non-medical person, people who have pigment dispersion glaucoma, or people who have a friend or relative and just want to know more about pigment dispersion syndrome and glaucoma. Okay, has that? Yep, that's gone through. So firstly, let's go through the structure of the talk. It's not going to be a lecture. It's going to be more like a Q&A of what my patients often ask me in clinic. So it's going to be sort of a question and I'll try and address it. So firstly, we always start with what is PDS and how does it cause glaucoma? And then we'll move on to who tends to get PDS and when does it happen? And sorry if I'm using the PDS, it means pigment dispersion syndrome. It's just easier to say than pigment dispersion syndrome at every single point. So PDS. And lastly, we will end on our treatment options. So how do we treat pigment dispersion syndrome and glaucoma? So let's start off with what is pigment dispersion syndrome? So PDS is a clinical diagnosis whereby pigment is excessively released from within the eye, resulting in the deposition of this pigment all over the front structures of the eye, or the front house, I call it. And one of these structures is the drainage system, or what we like to call the trabecular meshwork. You might have heard this word come up in clinics or in glaucoma literature. It just basically means the drains of the eyes. Now, much like clogging up of the drainage system in your house is going to be a problem, you can imagine in a closed system like the eyeball, if there is clogging up of your drains and the fluid can't go anywhere, this will cause a problem. And this problem is pressure to build up inside the eye and cause damage in some patients. Now, a common question is, how is pigment released? To answer this question, I'm going to have to take you back to medical school very quickly. No, I'm kidding. So you might wonder how this is in a sort of eyeball normally. I will give you a whistle-stop tour of the normal eye. So here's a picture of a normal eye. Now to orientate you, we add a little bit of your eyelids here. So you can see this is the bit that we see with the naked eye is only this bit. Everything else is at the back and you can't see all this bit. The bits that we see is here. You got your lashes at the top. And then on top of that, you will see a picture. So if you see your light in a picture in the form of a ray of light, it comes this way and it goes to the back of your eye, much like a camera system. The bit that we're interested in pigment dispersion syndrome and in a lot of the glaucoma mechanisms is the front house of the eyeball. So it's this red box that I've picked out here. Now, to allow us to understand, we're going to flip the eye so that it's now facing the ceiling. My eye is now, I'm looking to the ceiling, and we are going to zoom into the eye, into that red box. And we need to look at what we're interested in now is the iris. So the iris is what gives us our color of the eye. So when I'm a blue-eyed, green-eyed, brown-eyed person, it allows us to call ourselves that because our iris is colored. So everyone's got a different iris color. Now the iris plays a star in the pigment dispersion syndrome because it is why the pigment is dispersed a lot, and I will show you why. Now the iris is very mobile. It changes shape to allow more or less light in. For those photography enthusiasts out there, the iris is much like your camera aperture. So it allows more light or less light coming in, depending on the light conditions and what your eye needs to be, condition needs to be in. Now we're still looking at the ceiling. We can take pictures with a camera called the anterior segment OCT. And it's much like a CT scan of your brain, except for we don't use x-rays, it just uses light. So we can take a picture across the eye to reveal sections or slices of the eye. So here is one of a normal eye. These leaflets are like the iris, they're like leaflet-like structures. So this bit that I'm pointing to, that's the colored blue or green iris that we're talking about. And the iris moves a lot with the amount of light that we shine onto you. So if you look at the top picture and compare it to the bottom picture, the top box is an eye in a light condition that is bright, so a bright light condition. And so the iris will, the pupil will close, the iris will spread itself out and make the pupil smaller. And you'll see here, if we measure it, the iris is larger or longer in the cross section. And in the dim condition, you can see the same length would shorten. So the iris will shorten and it'll open up because it's dark and I need more light to create my picture in my eye. So you will see the iris will shorten. And you'll see the difference there is between it in light and dark conditions. So it's moving a lot. It's moving a lot throughout the day. Now, let's look at dispersion patient. You may be able to spot which one it is. It's the one at the bottom. The one at the top is a normal eye. And you may notice it looks very similar, but there is a subtle difference. The iris is bowed backwards in the bottom picture, which is a picture of a patient with pigment dispersion syndrome. This back bowing rubs and chafes against the iris, against the structure behind the iris, which is the lens. So it just keeps chafing like that. This chafing causes release of pigment in excessive amounts, and it lands in several areas in the front bit of the eye. So what does this look like? All this chafing causes the iris to have window defects. We call it window because you can see through it. Window defects which give these appearances, which we call iris transillumination. This is only visible with close-up eye examination. So if you take a picture, you can't actually see it. But it's a very pretty sign, which we often use to teach our junior doctors. So you may see, if you do have this sign, we do often bring in the opticians or junior doctors to have a look and identify, because it is very pretty. And the red-orange reflex, which you see here, is basically what you would get from photographs, where you do a bright flash and you take a picture, you get a red eye in the pictures. So this is what you see. It's not that your eyeball is illuminating, giving out orange light. No, it is because it's reflecting. The bright light is going to the back of the eye. It gets reflected back off the back of the eye as an orange reflex. So it's often called the red reflex. So if you don't have PDS, all you have is just an orange round red reflex in the center. But if you have pigment dispersion syndrome, there is this radial appearance in the areas where the chafing has occurred, so much so that the iris has been rubbed off, allowing the light, which is reflecting off the back of the eye, to shine straight through. Now, what does it look like when it's deposited in the front of the eye? It's, again, very pretty and is used in exams a lot. Here you see it deposited on the lens and its supportive structures. You can see it deposited on the front of the eye, which is called the cornea. It's on the inside of the cornea. And it looks like a spindle. And it's even got a name called Krukenberg spindle, named after the person who first noticed it. And it's called a spindle because of the convection currents, the way the pigment is in the eye and it's deposited in that way. So it's very, very interesting. But most importantly, it is deposited in the drainage system of the eye, which is what I was mentioning before, the trabecular meshwork. And you can see here how thick and how dark all the pigment is in the guttering of the eye, the drainage system. And this drainage system actually looks pretty much like a drain, and it runs all the way around 360 degrees around the eyeball. Now, in comparison with a normal drainage system, there is pigment there as well, but it's much less, to much less extent. You can see here how much more pigment is deposited in people with pigment dispersion. So you remember how I mentioned that the pressure can increase when our drainage systems are blocked up with pigment? This is important as prolonged raised eye pressure in a susceptible eye can lead to glaucoma damage. Some people's drainage system can still function despite having this load of pigment, but some can't, and it will lead to high pressure and possibly glaucoma. Now, just a quick recap. What is glaucoma? Glaucoma is this condition whereby slowly and silently and irreversibly there is damage to the optic nerve. Now, what is the optic nerve? That is like a TV cable from the eyeball. All the nerves in the back of the eyes are fanned out and gather at one point to leave the eye to the brain, and that is this optic nerve. And ideally, we want a big, nice, fat bundle of nerves. And you can see here to the left, there is an optic nerve that's nice and fat, like a full donut. Whereas to the left, to the right, there is this loss of nerves, and this loss is thickening, like someone has taken a big bite out of it. So glaucoma is like the picture here on our right. Currently, the eye pressure is our only modifiable risk factor we know that can slow down the progression of glaucoma. And this is why we harp on about pressure. And hence, all glaucoma treatments aim to reduce the eye pressure. And here we can see how a normal visual field can progress to damage like glaucoma. It's often a silent sight loss. Vision is lost over years without symptoms, and it's often called the silent thief of sight. Here you can see a patient's visual field mapped out from normal to severe, and black is what a patient can't see. It's often done every year at your opticians or in the eye clinics. Your head is fit in a bowl and you click when you see a light. That is the visual field test. And this is a very important test for us to estimate how much vision you actually have left. There is no right or wrong answers. Just look straight ahead, click when you see a light. Don't put too much thought into it, as the machine is quite smart. It will test and retest the bits that you weren't too sure about or it wasn't too sure about, to sort of give us a report that is as accurate a picture of your vision as it can. So a lot of patients ask, well, why me? Most of the time, there is no reason, and it was pure luck of the draw and the way your eye was born. Most of the time, it is not inherited. There are some cases where there is inheritance and there are genes that are linked to it, but most of the time it is what we call sporadic, just happens. It's seen more commonly in males and people who have some short-sightedness, although we do see it in women as well and in normal non-short-sighted eyes. So who gets PDS glaucoma and when? Well, most people, we have to bear in mind, do not convert to glaucoma. People with just pigment dispersion that has been found at a routine sight test, you should keep your review to try and detect any signs of conversion to glaucoma damage. So most people don't, but around 30 to 35% of people with PDS can scoop over to develop high pressure with no glaucoma, or they can scoop over to the other end where they develop high pressure and glaucoma. And most of these people develop high pressures of glaucoma in their younger years of 30s to 40s, much younger than the normal glaucoma, which affects patients in their 6th or 7th decades usually. Now, this is worrying for us because it affects young people who are often very busy, working, bearing children, doing other activities. So it's extremely important that if you have been diagnosed with pigment dispersion syndrome, we need to get our annual eye glaucoma examinations to detect high pressure or glaucomatous damage. This is because, as with every other disease, the earlier we catch it, the earlier we can treat it. It's much like it's easier to stop a horse that's at a trot than one that is galloping full speed ahead. So I have PDS. What now? A lot of patients ask. Well, it all depends really on what stage of PDS sort of spectrum you're on. Do you have PDS with no high pressure that was just picked up routinely at a routine eye examination? Then most people would definitely tell you to get your annual glaucoma eye examination, to offer you laser peripheral iridotomy. This is where the laser is making a hole in the iris, which is the colored bit of the eye, to try and restore the iris configuration back to what it should be. So, for example, in this picture, the top image is pigment dispersion patient, and the bottom image is a patient after the laser iridotomy. So you can see how they're trying to prevent this back bowing from happening. Now you would look at this and think, this is very convincing. Surely it would fix everything, but unfortunately it doesn't. So there is still insufficient evidence to support the role of laser iridotomy to prevent glaucoma. So I would definitely have this conversation with your consultant ophthalmologist. But in the end, I think this needs to be a decision between yourself and your clinician. So how do we treat it if it is causing a pressure when you have high pressure and glaucoma? Now, there is no true consensus as it is not a common disease. It only makes up about 2 to 3% of patients who are diagnosed with glaucoma. Now, on top of this, there is this exercise phenomenon, which you may or may not have experienced, why some patients with pigment dispersion syndrome actually experience symptoms of eye pain or headache on that side, blurred vision with the vigorous activity like gym work or running, just even running up and down the stairs. I've had patients who experience this. And these are symptoms of the high eye pressure building up with the high load of pigment released after exercise. Now, obviously, exercise is very good for overall health, and it would go against every grain in a doctor to tell you to stop exercising. However, having said that, should the exercise cause symptomatic and sustained raised eye pressure, the conversation needs to be had with your consultant ophthalmologist or clinician as to whether your exercise needs to be modified or even reduced, or perhaps a stronger glaucoma treatment could be administered during exercise in anticipation of pressure spike. But the majority of glaucoma of patients will likely be offered a glaucoma eye drop, much in line with normal glaucoma treatment. So those glaucoma eye drops would be aimed at reducing your eye pressure. You may also have heard about selective laser trabeculoplasty, also called SLT. Now, this is offered as first-line treatment for other normal glaucomas in tandem with glaucoma eye drops. So if you have non-PDS glaucoma, you'd have the choice of, do you want SLT or do you want eye drops? However, in patients who have pigment dispersion syndrome, there have been reports that SLT can cause pressure spikes. And so it's not that we do not offer it, we do offer it, and I do offer it as well, but perhaps they will be offering it at a lower power to try and prevent pressure spikes, or we perform it at 2 fractionated visits, so we split up the power and reduce the chances of pressure spiking happening. So this approach can be offered as well. You may ask, what is selective laser trabeculoplasty? You can see here in this picture, it is basically this red light that is laser that is shone on to the drains of the eyes, which you're familiar with now from the pictures before. And it is delivered using a contact lens and is done just in the eye clinic in a room using topical drop anesthesia, and you go home on the same day, you don't stay overnight. It's usually done within 10 minutes. This laser causes the body to repair itself in the drains and makes your natural drains work better. So this is what SLT is. How do we treat PDS if it is sustained, intractable, or it's also caused advanced glaucoma? Now that would be surgical options, and there are several surgical options that are available, and they would be similar to the options you get with glaucoma patients in general. So this would depend on how advanced the glaucoma is, how your eye is, etc. And there are options such as minimally invasive glaucoma surgery, which is also called MIGS, or trabeculectomy, which is where we make an alternative drainage in your eyeball by making a hole in the eye and fashioning a trap door on top of your eyeball to restrict the amount of outflow from the eyeball to the outside of the eyeball. Now that in itself, all this glaucoma surgical options is another talk in itself. And ultimately, it will be a surgeon preference. So it all depends, what you're offered will depend on your consultant ophthalmologist and what is offered in their department. There are many ways to skin a cat. And so in the end, the aim of the game would be to lower your pressure, however we try to get there. Often patients worry about going blind, and blindness is very rare, luckily, in pigmentary glaucoma. In a study of 113 patients with pigment dispersion syndrome and pigmentary glaucoma, only 3 eyes in 2 patients were blind. Progression of the disease, though, going from high pressure or no pressure to high pressure or high pressure to glaucoma, progression of the disease can happen. So regular review is essential. However, there's a silver lining in that there is a phenomenon that in later on life, about 60s to 70s, 6th to 7th decade, the disease tends to burn out, whereby the pressure sort of stabilizes, but the damage, if you've got glaucoma, would still be present, and it's not reversible because glaucoma is not a reversible disease. We don't know why this happens, but some postulate that there is only so much iris you can rub off. And so it has reached a stage where you can release no more pigment. And some postulate, as we get older, the supporting structures around the iris stiffens up, so we get less of this backbowing feature of the iris structure. So in summary, I would say pigment dispersion syndrome is a clinical diagnosis that can present with a range of severity from early with no issues at all to late with high pressures and progression to advanced glaucoma. So it is very important for us to keep our eye appointments to monitor for glaucoma progression. Thank you. I'll take any questions now.
That's wonderful, Sin. That was absolutely fantastic. I was absolutely scribbling notes on that, absolutely madly, because I was learning so much
I
from
took
that.
you back to medical school.
It really was. It was amazing.
Medical school.
It really was eyeball medical school. And of course, we do so much about the back of the optic nerve. So it's really interesting to hear about the front of the eye and the iris as well, which is something where we don't kind of focus on as much with Glaucoma UK. So it's fascinating to hear about that. Thank you so much. Got some questions coming in. So if that's all right, I'm going to dive straight in.
Yeah.
Now, I've got some questions that were asked straight away. So I'm going to get to those ones straight away. I've got here, what is your view on canaloplasty surgery for pigment dispersion? I have read very positive studies for people with that, for people with pigment dispersion. What's your view there, Sin?
So I don't think there is a randomized controlled trial which is the gold standard for research, obviously, for pigment dispersion or pigmentary glaucoma or pigment dispersion syndrome and canaloplasty yet, mainly because there's not many of people with pigment dispersion around, but theoretically it could be useful, and I would certainly offer that as well. Because canaloplasty, for those who don't know what it is or haven't heard about it, is basically sort of like putting a buster gel down your drains, clearing the leaves or the pigment within the drains all the way around and making it work again. So we need to know whether it works and whether there's any side effects at all. And we need to know whether there is longevity in this. So if I clear away the pigment in there, how soon will the buildup happen in patients with pigmentary glaucoma or pigment dispersion syndrome? So there's many questions about that because canaloplasty is fairly new on the market. There are trials for canaloplasty and non-pigmentary glaucoma, and they're very good with very promising results. So it would be very interesting for us to see what the results would be for pigmentary glaucoma. But as I said, that would require probably a multi-center trial because there's not many patients lying around with this disease. So in order to prove that it does show efficacy, you need more patients to compare.
Absolutely. And I can also imagine as well with getting these kind of trials, randomly controlled trials as well, if it's, we're saying about the percentage of the populations of who is affected by this syndrome, but then also how many of them go on to develop glaucoma. So it's not that if you have it, you're definitely going to develop glaucoma. And because of those numbers, I imagine it's harder to get, you know, the funding to be able to do these randomly controlled trials to actually be able to prove this stuff. So yeah, I would suggest as well, if anyone's watching here and you're thinking, do you know what, this sounds fascinating, get in contact with the helpline as well and say to us, look, this is what I'm doing, I'd like to know more about this. And you know, we can definitely look into new research coming out and keep you updated about that. But thank you so much for that question, and thanks for that answer. That's wonderful. Okay, another question I have here. I have PDS with secondary glaucoma and I'm booked in for cataract procedures. Does the surgeon have to take this into account?
Well, it depends. So if the surgeon is proficient with minimally invasive glaucoma surgery, they may consider one of the MIGS options to perform at the same time as your cataract operation. And it also depends on the severity of your glaucoma at that time. So is your glaucoma actually stable? Have you burnt out already? Is your pressure actually normal? Then you won't need any additional MIGS on top of the cataract. So it all depends on your condition, your surgeon's preference. So I would definitely open up the conversation with them. You can always ask. There's no such thing as a silly question, and we will always strive to give you all the options possible. And whether the option is suitable for yourself or not will need to be decided between yourself and the consultant ophthalmologist. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing we kind of keep getting back to people about as well, is often your glaucoma is unique to you and your whole body circumstances are taken into account when surgeons are looking at particular surgery. So there's kind of no one size fits all, is there? It kind of depends on all of these things. That's absolutely wonderful. Okay, I've got a few more questions that were kind of coming out from me, and I've got some more general questions as well, but I want to make sure we're looking at the pigment dispersion specifically, definitely to start with. So when you were talking about, I think the question that I was looking at is there anything I can avoid to you know, I can do to avoid PDS? You said about watching exercise, for example, for kind of exacerbating the situation. I mean, is it just luck if the PDS turns into glaucoma PDS?
Well, there is, through the observational studies, they have linked high pressures at presentation to be a risk factor for progression to glaucoma. So if your pressures when you presented to, say, the optician or the eye clinic is already high, you know, above 24, then you're more likely to progress to glaucoma, because it is one of the risk factors for glaucoma. And if you have high pressures for a sustained amount of time, it's kind of like an elephant jumping on a trampoline, and that trampoline is your nerves. So that's why you get glaucoma. It is luck how your eyeball is shaped and born. So you're born with PDS, but we can monitor you and treat you to try and prevent you from developing glaucoma. So this is the job of the clinicians and yourself, to keep the reviews, keep the drop treatments or whatever treatments that we will be giving.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's the other thing as well. We say to people, you know, about going for their regular eye test, they'll be picking up things like PDS early. So then if there is any risk, they can feed you into the system much quicker to make sure that you're getting assessed and making sure nothing's turning nasty at all. So absolutely, just obviously a reminder for everyone to be going out and getting their eye test, not just people who are, you know, thinking they're more at risk because of their age. I was going to ask about the laser peripheral iridotomies. You'd said about this is something that sometimes people use in this particular type of glaucoma. Can you just talk us a bit about what a laser peripheral iridotomy is?
Yes, so it's basically the same setup as SLT, as I mentioned, in a clinic, done in like 5 to 10 minutes. You have a contact lens going on to your eye, which delivers the laser. Now it's a different laser. It punches a hole straight through the iris, tiny hole, so about 300 microns, and it's not visible, so you won't be able to see it. Some people say that the procedure itself is painful, a little bit like a little sting, very short 1 second sting, and some people don't perceive anything at all. So hard to say, but the reason why we offer this is because of the change in the iris configuration, which you've seen in the slide. Now, the evidence we tried, there's several randomized control trials actually tried to look at this, and unfortunately, it's a bit inconclusive. It does show that a subset of patients, so I didn't go into the trials because I wanted to keep this nice and entertaining rather than mundane, boring trials data, but there are trials out there about laser peripheral iridotomies looking at whether we can prevent people with pigment dispersion syndrome from becoming glaucoma, and it's inconclusive. So a Cochrane study, a Cochrane review, which is a large a sort of review of all the data out there. It's a structured and good review, and they saw that there was no good sufficient evidence to say that you need to get that laser iridotomy will prevent it. Now, in the one study that showed that there was a difference, it was more in a subset of pigment dispersion syndrome. It seemed to help patients more along the earlier stage of the pigment dispersion syndrome spectrum. So patients with no high pressures, just pigment dispersion syndrome, no glaucoma. And in that subset, it seemed to have an effect. But then again, it is a subset of a large studies, which is obviously has bias research bias to it. So therefore, we say that there is no real, true, sufficient, strong evidence, but there is an inkling towards that evidence. And certainly, if you look at the pictures of the anterior segment OCT, it does look different after laser iridotomy. So I'll definitely have that conversation with your consultant ophthalmologist to see whether it is advisable or suitable for you. Because as with everything we do to you, there is a risk, and the risk of laser iridotomy will be mentioned. Or would you like me to go through it?
Well, I mean, I think it's about that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose the thing with all of these things is, does it have to be, there's some, I suppose some basics would be really good to know, you know, does it need to be under a general or a local if you're having?
Topical.
Right, lovely. So
drop anesthetic, just like the SLT. Some people feel pain, some don't, and the pain is short and just like a bee sting, just like a tiny shot. That's it.
Fantastic. And is there a long recovery after it, or do patients?
No, and you can still see immediately afterwards. It shouldn't affect the vision much. Maybe it might affect it because all of the drops that you're having put in your eye, but really the next day you should be fine. You will have eye drops to use 4 times a day for 1 week. That's a steroid eye drop if you have laser iridotomy.
Great. And I take it the consultant will want to check your pressures afterwards as well, just to make sure that they're actually, that's
because of the slight increased risk of pressure spikes with patients with PDS.
Great. So we just keep a close eye, sorry, on you if that's the case. No, that's wonderful. And these are the types of questions we often get. You know, people are told, I've been told I need to have this treatment, you know, and actually, how am I going to feel in the morning? Or, you know, I'm a bit scared. Is it going to hurt? So it's really useful to kind of hear these things as well. I've got a question about with PDS, does it tend to be a slow, steady build-up of pigment in the drainage, or can you kind of get acute attacks?
So you can get acute attacks. So as I was mentioning with the exercise phenomenon, some people actually get sharp rises of pressure when they're exercising, going up and down the stairs sometimes, or just sort of running around, being a bit in a stressful condition. Some don't. Some people with pigment dispersion syndrome don't actually have this phenomenon, or they might be having it, but they don't feel it. So every person's eyeball is different, much like in the laser, some people feel it, some people don't. And with the eye pressure, it's the same. Some people will feel the high pressures when they get it, and some don't. So you can get high pressure spikes, but not know about it. So it can be silent. But there is some people who will get this blurry vision, eye pain, or like a dull ache, and the vision goes blurry because of the pressure is so high. It's blurry not because of the pigment that's released, it's blurry because the pressure is so high. And if it's so high, the front of the eye, the cornea, which is normally, like I call it, the window to the soul, because it's a window, it's clear, and there are cells that make it clear for you. And if the pressures are too high, the cells stop doing their job as well in making it clear. So it fuzzes up, the cornea fuzzes up. And that's why you get the blurry vision with these acute attacks.
I see. Okay. So, and what about is there any symptoms? Say, it was really interesting for me to learn that PDS can kind of happen to people, and that it doesn't necessarily go on to develop glaucoma, but sometimes it might. Is there things that people would know about their own eyes? Is there any symptoms that patients might think, oh, this is a symptom of PDS, or does it have to be looked at by a optician?
It has to be looked at, clinical examination. So you can't self-diagnose PDS. Basically, you have to get an examination, and the examination would involve a slit lamp examination, much like when you're at the opticians or the eye clinic, if you've ever been to eye clinic. Bright light shining in the eye, and they might have a look at the drains of your eyes to see how the pigment is dispersed. So that will be like a contact lens that goes onto the eye with a bit of jelly, feels cold, and that will let us have a look at the drains of the eyes, and that will tell us if there's pigment all around, because in normal eyes you wouldn't have such homogeneous dark pigment all the way around.
See, that's interesting as well. And I suppose a question that I had really about, we as I said, talking about the iris, which is something we don't normally talk about. When we talk about the optic nerves a lot, we talk about the fact that they can't regenerate. You know, they're not able, and when you've lost that, that's gone forever. Does the iris regenerate?
No, it doesn't.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons why they say maybe that's why patients with PDS burn out, because if you've rubbed as much as you can, you've created a window and that's it. There's nothing, there's no more pigment for you to rub off anymore, because it doesn't regenerate.
So it's actually a condition, unlike what we say with glaucoma a lot of times, that actually might get better with age.
Yes. Well,
right.
Yeah, it burns out. As long as we don't develop glaucoma before that happens.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. They're all the kind of PDS questions I've got at the moment. If anyone has PDS specific questions, please get them in, because I want to make sure we really focus on those. I've got a couple of other questions, kind of glaucoma related questions. Sin, are you happy that I kind of just ask for your view on a couple of those? Is that all right? Just while we've got a few minutes left. I suppose the first one is we talk about B3 a lot in a lot of our webinars, and whenever we have a consultant, people are very keen to find out, what's your view on B3? Should we be taking B3? What do you think, Sin? Is this something that might help?
So it is the latest flavor of the month, of the years, put it this way. There are many randomized controlled, well, there's one major one, controlled trial that's being done at the moment, involving more fields, and I would refer all the current data to them, or the questions to them. However, the published data is not out there yet, so we haven't, isn't NICE recommended yet. Although the laboratory studies and the preliminary study is promising from the Croston group, etc. So I would say watch this space. We're not supposed to prescribe it yet, and if we do prescribe it, it would be in pretty high doses usually. So they'd have to come about that formulation. There may need to be monitoring of other baseline bodily functions. So I would say hold off on that for now, unless your consultant ophthalmologist is happy to prescribe it for you, because as far as I know, I think you have to be prescribed it in that large amounts. So I personally don't prescribe it yet, but I do know that it is a very promising field that I look forward to listening to the trial data and NICE guidance on.
Absolutely. It can be frustrating sometimes, I think, for people who are kind of, living with glaucoma, and they see these kind of developments coming out and they think, can I just go for it? Can I just do these things? But the random controlled trials are so important. It's so important that we go through the proper process to make sure that all side effects or any issues with this, with all patients, are taken into account. But the good thing about B3 is it's really kind of moving forward, I think, now. So fingers crossed it won't be too long before we have something where we can be really assured that we're giving out the best there. I've got one here, and I think this is probably, I mean, we can both kind of talk about this. Someone said they've had a trab up in the last 10 days. Third visit to the hospital, my pressure was still 6. Consultant seems worried. What should my pressures be?
That's a golden question,
isn't it? Just
so target pressures, basically, we're talking about. It depends. Each patient is different. So some patients are happy at 18. Some patients I'll be happy at 15. Some patients I want them to be at 6 or 4. And usually if they have low pressure glaucoma or normal tension glaucoma, I am aiming for a 6 and a 4. If you read the papers out there, I suppose they do report numerical low pressure of 6 is sort of worrying, but if the patient sees well and there is no other problems in the back of the eye, then actually a pressure of 6 might be what he or she wants. So it all depends on what he or she wants, what your target pressure is, whether the eyeball is happy at 6 or 4 pressure, and then you go from there. So if say, for example, if my patient was a low pressure glaucoma, I'm aiming for an under 10, a pressure of 6 with good vision, 20/20 vision or 6/6 vision, and no problems at the back of the eye, then I'd say that's a success. But it all depends. If he or she looks worried, then maybe ask them, are you worried? Like, should I be worried? Things like that.
Absolutely right. And, you know, we'd always encourage people to write all their questions down and to speak to their consultant. And if they can't speak to their consultants, we know how busy people are. If you're really worried, get in contact with your consultant secretary and say, listen, I'm really concerned about this. I could do with some reassurance. But again, it's that thing of, you know, there's no one size fits all. Pressure for one person is you know, not right for somebody else. So you can't. And we often use the example in the eye clinic waiting room where people said, oh, what's your pressure? And they've said, oh, mine's a 10. And oh, is it? Oh, mine's a 12. You know, you can't have a single pressure. That's
becomes a competition in the waiting room.
Absolutely, absolutely. But there's just no right answer. That the consultant is taking into account so many different things. And it was interesting, you said, you know, the pressure measurement might be one thing, but also we need to look at the back of the eye. We need to look at how your vision is. So it's all these things taken into account, isn't it?
And I think it's important, if you're worried, just make a list of questions. I actually like it when patients come in with a list of questions. It means that you can get the most out of your consultant's time as possible. So I do sort of like the list of things. So go ahead and make a list, and then at least when you leave the consultation, you know you've asked everything, and
Absolutely.
you know, you feel better about it rather than leaving and thinking, oh, I forgot about that, and you know.
Absolutely. And I don't know a consultant, in all the consultants that we've met in the time, that if you feel like you've asked a question, you've got an answer, but you haven't understood what's been said, or you don't feel like you've understood, say, can you repeat that to me again? Or can you explain that to me a little bit more? Consultants want you to be able to understand what's being said. So it's important just to kind of say, you know, no, sorry, what was that? And I don't understand that. So have confidence, I think. I
always try and make sure the patients understand what they have, because it is your eye, it's your life, your vision. And if you don't understand why you're taking these drops, you're not going to take these drops, or you know what the next plan is. I like to tell my patients what the next step is, because glaucoma is a lifelong thing. It's not a quick fix. There is no quick fix. We are basically trying to keep your vision within your lifetime. So we always need to know what the next steps are, etc. So it's very important that you understand your condition.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely bang on. So I've got a couple more questions. Again, these are general. You may or may not be able to assist on these, but just so I can kind of fill up everything that's here. So somebody's saying, I've had a trabeculectomy and deep sclerotomy on both eyes. I now have a cataract, and they're concerned about scar tissue. Should it be taken off?
As in developing scar tissue or already developed scar tissue?
So, well, yeah, this is it, isn't it? They said they're concerned about scar tissue.
Okay, so basically when we give you a glaucoma drainage operation, which is what you've had, so it's like an alternative drainage. We've said your own drains are kaput, we're giving you new drains, so that's what you had. When we take out your cataract, we cause inflammation in the eye because it's trauma. And we know from data that it goes on for at least 1 year, this inflammation in the eye. So inflammation causes scarring, basically. And if your glaucoma drainage operation is there sitting nicely and working well, then we always say that there is a 1 in 4 chance that after the cataract operation, your glaucoma drainage operation might fail. So 1 in 4 chance that you might have to go back onto drops, etc., etc. So it's always a balance as to how bad is the cataract, and maybe that's why they're trying to put it off. But if your vision is bad, then at the end of the day, you need good vision. So I would do the cataract operation for my patients, and then we would fix the scarring later on if it develops. You might be the 3 out of 4 who doesn't develop it, but most of the time they do. You can develop it. And when that happens, there are things that we can do as well to sort of remove the scar tissue. Things like what we call needling. That's a horrible name, I know, but it's basically using a needle to cut away the scar tissue of your previous glaucoma drainage operation. It's a bit like bramble growing across the trap door that we've built, or the glaucoma drainage passage. So we use that to sort of clear the hedge a bit.
That's wonderful, and I do agree with you. We need a new name for needling. So if anyone's got any suggestions out there, that would be something that doesn't sound as terrible, then that would be fantastic. And finally, I've got one here. Now, this is a really kind of big question, and it's someone saying here, my husband's got severe advanced glaucoma and he also has Parkinson's. Is there a connection? Again, it's a research question. I'm sure we don't have the answer to that, but I mean, you could argue that perhaps with Parkinson's it's more difficult to monitor glaucoma and keep on top of it, and all of these.
So what was the question again?
My husband has severe advanced glaucoma. He also has Parkinson's. Is there a connection?
Funnily enough, there is a connection. So in a few of the studies in the papers, there is, well, they're looking at it, definitely, that there may be a link between sort of neurodegenerative sort of type diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, that kind of neural degenerative diseases with glaucoma.
Wow.
I'm not up to date with the latest trials or studies or observational studies on this, but I am aware that there is a link that has been proposed in several of the observational studies, I think.
Well, that's fascinating. I had no idea about that. And that's definitely something that we can be looking at, and to look at papers and kind of try to keep people up to date if this is something that people are interested in. That's fascinating.
But I don't know if there's a direct link, because you want to link something, it's very, very hard. But there is sort of that sort of trend.
Absolutely. It's the correlation versus causation, isn't it, as well?
Exactly.
A bit of a nightmare, but that's why we have to work so hard, why randomly controlled trials, and why all the research that we do is so important to try to really get those links. So that's absolutely fantastic. That's all the questions that I have. I've actually got through all of our questions today, and we're really, really happy. Thank you so much for not just answering the ones about pigment dispersion, but also the more general ones we had today. What I would like to do, everybody, is just I'm going to share my last screen for today. I'm going to do that now, and just with a little bit of information about, if I can get this going forward, here we go. Right, let me stop that share. Let me try again. Maybe a second, guys, bear with. Right, and this one. This one, excellent. There we are. We get there eventually. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. As I said, I think this is one of those ones where, as people get diagnosed, as we said, it is quite rare. They then come back to this webinar, and it will be available not just to watch on our Facebook almost immediately, but also on our YouTube channel within probably next week. It will be available to watch. So if anyone's missed it, not been able to catch it, you can catch it on our YouTube channel, and it will be available there to view. I'm now going to launch my second poll, which is really important, guys. As I said, if you can let me know what you feel you now know about pigment dispersion glaucoma. So I've put that up on the screen now. While I've got that up on the screen for you to answer, I want to give you our helpline details. If you have any questions that are now niggling in the back of your head, or you're thinking about what else, I've got some more questions I haven't managed to ask today, please call our helpline on 01233 648170, or you can contact our glaucoma email address, where our helpline team are also available to answer questions, on helpline@glaucoma.uk. Monday to Friday, 9:30 till 5 for the helpline, and our helpline assessors are hugely experienced. There is not a question they have not been asked. If we don't know the answer to the question, we have a fantastic group of ophthalmologists that we will call on to say, excuse me, we've never heard about this. Can you help us with this question? We have a couple of more talks coming up over November that please feel free to join us for those. The first is about Charles Bonnet syndrome, and we have the founder of Esme's Umbrella, who is a charity for people with Charles Bonnet, Judith Potts, and she's going to be speaking to us all about the condition on the 3rd of November at 7 p.m. So you can register for that on our Glaucoma UK website. And the next one after that is called Living with Glaucoma, Tricks and Hints from a Person Living with Glaucoma. And we've got a wonderful person with glaucoma lined up to talk to us all about their experience and some of the tricks and hints that they use to navigate in everyday life. Okay, I think that we're almost finished. It's just to ask you to please fill in the survey that you will get at the end of this Zoom to tell us what you think about the survey. I know a few of you, especially our regulars, have done a few of these before, but they really help us to kind of understand what is it that people want out of a webinar and how we're doing. So please fill that in. That would be wonderful. Sin, thank you so much for giving up your time today to speak to us. It's very much appreciated. And as I said, I've learned so much today as well, so I'm going to be scribbling notes frantically. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful Thursday, in fact. Have a wonderful Thursday. Thanks, Sin. Thanks, Robin, as well. Take care, guys. Okay.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye.